One of the most common questions asked in any gacha game pertains to whether or not it's worth spending money on it, and the answer is almost without question always no. Gacha games have among the lowest cost-to-benefit ratios out of any video game genre. You're basically spending up to a month's rent for a character that realistically you only get maybe a couple hours of playtime a week out of at best. A far cry from, say, spending $15 a month to play Final Fantasy XIV with just hundreds of hours of things you can do on it. In spite of this, gachas have this uncanny ability to incentivize a portion of players into dropping ungodly amounts of money on the game, and Honkai Star Rail is no exception. Roughly 2 years ago, I posited if Genshin Impact was too expensive, detailing the pricing model of the game and how it could be seen as such. With Star Rail having a track record for being the more quote-unquote generous of the two, has it made improvements in this department, or could Star Rail possibly be even more pay to win? Let's find out. Honkai Star Rail is by all accounts a very focused game, in that it has an objective in mind and directs most if not all attention towards that objective, with more emphasis being placed on combat in this game in light of the absence of any meaningful exploration in the overworld. Character building, itemization, and progression take precedence. Not to say it's extremely hardcore, I find it to still be milder than some of the sweatier gachas out there, but its widest selection of game modes, each with endgame difficulties, means that who you have and how you build them can have a significant impact on if you can or cannot complete that content in a practical and efficient manner. All that's to say, Star Rail is a lot closer to a traditional gacha game than Genshin. While the former has been praised for being the more charitable of the two, a number of players have voiced that it's almost because they have to in light of the standards and expectations placed on those traditional gacha games. While I do wish that they were more generous, Genshin can somewhat get away with not giving us a whole lot of free stuff, considering there's nothing we can even use our new shiny toys on anyway. So the FOMO element is really just limited to not having characters in your collection, less on the actual pragmatic need for them. Now, how bad is the FOMO element in Star Rail? In some ways it's a little better, but in many ways I consider it to be a lot worse. For the uninitiated, FOMO is an acronym for fear of missing out. Almost everything that incites that fear in Genshin applies here. You have a colorful cast of characters in Star Rail with different personalities, of different backgrounds and origins, and their own eccentricities, possibly even more so than Genshin in my opinion. Dr. Ratio is a pretentious, arrogant scholar who is annoyingly as smart as he claims to be. Bronya is your serious, by-the-book, dutiful military type. Servalwolf is a super hacker who thinks life is a game. Qingque is just like us for real. You got the mommies, the crazies, the IRS, the Genki girls, the fashionista, the antisocials, and even some who can satisfy people with an android kink. Hey, not judging. Drip marketing for these units may be some of the most aggressive I've seen. I remember people were talking about how initially they were indifferent towards Sparkle, but after seeing her numerous trailers and promotional videos, that made them want to pull for her just to find out more about her. Even from a non-practical gameplay standpoint, Star Rail makes an effort to convince you that even if you're satisfied with the lineup you currently have, and that lineup is more than sufficient in completing even the hardest difficulty content, this new person can make your experience all the more exciting and enjoyable. Further compounding this is that gachas prey on the scarcity mindset with their finite windows of opportunity in obtaining said units. We've had a few reruns for units like Sela, Kafka, Jinyuan and such, but suffice to say, if you decide to skip a banner, you might go several months or longer before you have the chance to pull for them again. And with Star Rail releasing characters at an alarmingly fast rate, way faster than Genshin did, that will only worsen over time. Now, while FOMO to any degree may be seen as predatory, it ultimately depends on the degree of necessity. People, or in this case players, develop a fear of missing out on something if that something is seen as valuable or necessary to them and improvements to their current situation or lives. If that something is of little importance to them, then there's not as much pressure to go after it. Character appeal certainly goes a long way, but Star Rail is first and foremost the game. Practical usability takes precedence, and that is where we encounter the first contributing factor in favor of Star Rail being possibly too expensive. The aforementioned game modes we have in Star Rail, ranging from Memory of Chaos to Pure Fiction to Swarm Disaster and Golden Gears, all scale to a point where the final stages can get, for lack of a better term, pretty moldy. Unless you resort to strategies like Remembrance cheesing through everything, Conundrum 12, Difficulty 5, MLC 12 and so on will tax even Dolphin players. Whales probably still have an easy time, but I mean, if you're dumping 5 months mortgage payment on the game, I sure hope you're having an easy time. In contrast to Genshin's more lenient environment in that you can effectively brute force your way through Spiral Abyss floors without consideration for the Abyssal Moon Blessing, Star Rail doesn't let you get away with Unga Bungaing nearly as much. Its turn-based nature encourages or even obligates you to pay close attention to whatever memory turbulence is in effect per cycle, as not taking advantage of it will result in a comparatively onerous clear effort for you. The lack of open-ended nuance amplifies that pressure, as the strength of a team is almost entirely dependent on each party member's individual strength. With no elemental reactions in this game, a weaker party cannot reliably supplement their DPS through external means. It all starts and ends with the capabilities of your units. Considering that players can fail Storm Disaster or Golden Gears runs due to not getting the right bonuses that make up for their character deficiencies is a testament to that. You don't have Fushuen to cover tank, you need to be even more multi with your blessings and curios to provide you the defense that she would have otherwise given. A consequence of this is that players are not just inconvenienced for not having ideal units, they're sometimes gatekept for not having them. Thankfully, StarRail isn't as black and white when it comes to if you can or can't succeed with or without a character. Some games have content that literally cannot be completed unless you pull for whichever event banner is coinciding with the content in question. That being said, StarRail does implicitly suggest that if you don't pull for certain characters, it will only make you struggle that much more, if not now, then sooner or later in the future. There's one in particular that became the first and possibly only unit to achieve the status of must pull, at least before 2.1, that being Fuxuan. To say that Fuxuan makes your life so much easier would be the understatement of the year. Whether if it's because your choices are either her or Gepard and Fire Trailblazer, neither of which come remotely close in performance to her, or if StarRail escalated in a way that just happened to line up with what she excelled at, those who skipped Fuxuan way back in 1.3 have been at a serious disadvantage in the realm of completing some of the game's harder difficulty, where enemies dish out far more damage than the likes of Gepard can realistically keep up with, and healers are unable to mend in light of all units getting one-shotted. On the bright side, we now have a Venturine who can shoulder some of that burden, but that sort of reinforces a point of players getting screwed if they don't have any of the strong tanks in the game. At one point, healers were like that too. I recall Luocha having almost 100% pick rate for MOC between versions 1.1 through 1.5 prior to Huohua, with many players who skipped him feeling the sting of having done so. In this game, characters, or lack thereof, are more consequential to your experience, pressuring you to go for as many of them as possible. In Genshin, you can circumvent the absence of a healer through shields and vice versa. Alternatively, you can try methods like chain freeze, or simply learn how to dodge enemy attacks through movement and iframing through elemental bursts. In StarRail, if you don't have the right healer or tank, the attempt is impossible. It's a lot more stringent since there are no universal mechanics like dodging attacks or elemental reactions to boost your DPS. If there's an enemy with an extremely powerful attack, healers are useless, as your party would die before they had a chance to recover everyone. If there's an enemy that does AoE damage, taunts like Fire Trailblazer don't work. If there's an enemy that drains energy, Gepard loses a lot of power because the only form of protection he has is attached to his ultimate, making Fuxuan the only tank you can bring, again prior to a Venturine. Enemies with special mechanics directly counter certain units. For example, the Memory Zone meme has a mechanic that locks away a unit after a combination of 3 basic attacks, skills, and ultimates are used. From then on, you have to deal 5 instances of damage to the prison containing that unit, inherently favoring those who can apply several instances very quickly, such as damage over time or follow-up attacks. So if you don't have either of those, or some way to quickly break your teammates free, you're out of luck against this boss. Is it doable? Possibly, but the difference in effort it takes to fight an enemy with or without the right character is sometimes too much for it to be worthwhile, therefore punishing people who don't have those characters. StarRail does this a lot given the extensive variety in endgame content. Not only that, but there's the elemental system. For a lot of fights, breaking toughness gauges at just the right time can be the single critical difference between success or failure, as breaks completely disrupt key enemy attacks. This is another thing that adds more pressure for unit diversity. If the enemy has, say, physical wind and lightning weakness, going into that fight without a DPS capable of doing any of those elemental damage forms is like trying to run a marathon with a ball and chain wrapped around your leg. In other words, should you be missing damage dealers of those elements, you might just not be able to do that boss at all. The only solutions are to have as many powerful units of different elements as your wallet can sustain, or you need Silver Wolf and or Acheron, further proving my point that if you don't have those units, you're facing an increasingly uphill battle in StarRail's endgame. Putting it simply, StarRail needs a lot of units to account for all the different combat scenarios you'll find yourself in. There are no universal mechanics to rely on that can make up for not having certain units. Acheron comes the closest to being an all-purpose solution, making the pressure to pull for her extremely high, and if you remember over the past year, this has been a repeat occurrence. When Fuxuan came out, the game started bringing in a lot more AoE burst damage, pressuring players to pull for her. When Blade, Lunai, Danheng, and Jingliu were brought in, bosses were introduced that spawned minions you had to take out, while simultaneously damaging the boss itself. When Argenti came out, Pure Fiction came shortly after. When Renmei came out, so too did the need for consistent AoE buffing and debuffing as weakness breaks became more essential for neutralizing enemy tempo. The goalpost keeps moving, requiring more units with more coverage and more power. So there's definitely a greater sense of FOMO in this game than Genshin since the difficulty ceiling of StarRail is overall higher. I consider myself a dolphin and even I have a hard time thinking about skipping units out of concern that I might need them later. I can only imagine how much tougher it is for free-to-players who have to be even more selective about who they go after. I'm not saying that you need to have every character in the game, StarRail is not that unforgiving, but the difference in ease of completion with and without certain units is quite significant. Exacerbating this would have to be light cones too. I plan to go over this in a more dedicated video on the weapon system, but this is another aspect of the game that feels heavily pay to win. Originally, I was pleasantly surprised to find that you can purchase 5-star light cones on the Starlight Shop or Herta store, under the impression that StarRail did what Genshin could never and actually gave us a way to obtain 5-star weapons without pulling for them, until I realized the actual 5-star weapons they were cooking up for units. 5-star light cones are basically tailor-made for the character on visual display with little if any room for transferability. Fushuan's light cone is extraordinarily powerful, basically letting her perform the role of a tank, buffer, and healer simultaneously. But with the activation cost requiring her to lose HP, Chapard is pretty much disqualified from using it, even though he would very much appreciate having almost everything on this weapon except maybe the HP given he's a defense scaler. Even then, HP is useful. Renmei's light cone is similarly incredible, but it's inefficient on Bronya on account of its properties being based on break effect, which lines up nicely with Renmei's niche. This kind of specificity is found in virtually every single 5-star light cone that has come out. These weapons are so powerful in their effects and bonuses that characters feel only half as strong without them. Okay, I'm exaggerating, it's not that big of a difference, but it's still a major difference. So not only do you have to go for a lot of 5-star units, but for you to get the most out of them, you also need their signature weapon, especially since those weapons give completely new effects. Let's go back to Fushuan's light cone for instance. At the start of every wave, she basically fully heals the party. This means you never have to worry about getting one-shotted at the beginning of a fight if the enemy gets to move first. It is essentially a brand new ability as Fushuan has no way of replicating this within a base kit, and said ability fundamentally expanding on her capabilities in such a way that, for comparison's sake, Genshin weapons don't do. Akron's light cone implants a debuff on the target, which as you know is integral to stacking your ultimate. Apart from Silver Wolves, there's no other Nihility light cone that efficiently contributes to her playstyle. Generating even one more point of Slash Dream per attack completely alters who she can optimally work with or not, as it can help her reach breakpoints faster to run other units with her that wouldn't otherwise have been doable due to the differences in unit tempo between said supports. These light cones don't just help their signature wielder deal more damage or give stronger buffs than what is otherwise available, they literally give new properties and gameplay mechanics, some so impactful that they can effectively serve as characters of their own. That's the extent of how influential light cones are in this game. I should clarify that it's not a case of hard versus easy where having these units makes the content easy and not having them makes the content hard. It can potentially be a case of winnable versus impossible, where you need to have those units just to reliably clear the content without resetting a billion times, min-maxing the crap out of your units, or relying on cheese. Is it possible to zero-cycle clear MOC without an army of 5 stars? Absolutely, but only people who have extensive knowledge of the game and heavy optimization of the units they do have can pull this off. With these factors in mind, the need for many characters and weapons, I do find that StarL is a deceptively expensive game. I remember people were going nuts about getting so many free pulls and getting a free top tier 5-star, which is awesome to have, don't get me wrong. But when you think about the greater necessity for pulls, it almost feels like they have to be this generous just so players can survive. See, Genshin has an issue with being too parsimonious with their free stuff, but at the same time you don't really need free stuff. The game is so mind-numbingly easy that the only FOMO is not having a waifu or husbando to play with. You can go the next 2 years without pulling, and I guarantee you will still be able to complete Spiral Abyss in 2026. Like I stated already, StarL's not as hardcore as other gachas, but they do have a tendency to make you regret not pulling for units a lot more often. Even on my channel, I've gotten tons of comments from free-to-plays lamenting over not having Hoho or not having Argenti, Silver Wolf, or Kafka because the current MOC or whatever is just so stacked in favor of specific units that they have to put in so much more work to make up for not having them. You might be asking, why is this such a big deal if the only reward for this super endgame content is a few extra jades and stuff? The point is not the rewards, it's the feeling of missing out on the full experience. Players, even casuals, naturally want to experience the full game. That includes taking on endgame content. Even if there's no rewards, players still want to see everything the game has to offer and to test their limits. Being unable to, even if there's no practical incentive, can frustrate players who feel as if they're missing out on the satisfaction of reaching the highest point of StarL just because they don't have enough money. A lot of this may just be as a result of the game still being fairly new and people still needing more time to build up their units. I imagine once we reach version 3 and such, by that point most day 1 players will have a lot of tanks, healers, and damage dealers to account for most if not all situations. Or things can get worse and the game will become even more pay to win than it is now. I hope that's not the case, but from what Honkai 3rd players have told me, let's just hope the two games are similar in name only. Anyways, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. What do you guys think about this? Do you agree that StarL is too pay to win, or do you think I'm exaggerating things? Feel free to share in the comments. That's gonna be it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Honkai StarL discussions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.